What is going on, YouTube? This is a bit of a back to form basic video for me. It's Resident Evil. Today's video, we're discussing a Resident Evil villain problem. I know what you're thinking, Adam. We've had solid villains. I would argue that these villains are kind of hit or miss after Wesker, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Wesker, we're going to talk about everything that came after, and we're going to talk about the golden egg in Capcom's inventory that they desperately need to be using, and I think many of y'all know what I'm talking about when I refer to as the golden egg. Without further ado, let's jump in and discuss Resident Evil's villain problem.
Bizarre murder cases have recently occurred in Raccoon City. Apparently, there are outlandish reports of families being attacked by a group of about 10 people. Victims were apparently eaten.
1998. That's where it all started. The grisly murders in the Arklay Mountains. STARS was sent to investigate. Not to see what was happening, to be tested, see what bioweapons could do against military-trained specialists. At least that was Wesker's goal in mind. He wanted to get the data for Umbrella. But little did he know that kind of ultimately went out the window. Our heroes survived the horrors of the Spencer Mansion, and Wesker gets impaled by the ultimate life form. Wesker's journey truly begins there. A legacy that lasts over a decade ultimately ends in failure because, with a name like Ouroboros, it's ultimately doomed to fail. The snake eating itself just makes the most sense that he would not succeed. But he's given new life once the tyrant impales him. New strength, new speed, be able to move faster than the human eye can perceive. And that's sort of Wesker's true journey began. Kills Lisa Trevor, escapes the mansion, and begins his journey of revenge to take out Umbrella as well as the man behind it all, Spencer. We'd see Wesker reborn anew several months later in Code Veronica, playing with his food, Claire and Chris. Of course, he's a big giant weasel and can't fight someone stronger than him, so he has to punch down. And Chris deals with Alexia. He ultimately cannot beat Alexia, but he can definitely punch down on Chris and Claire. This also motivates Chris to get stronger, to be stronger because of what Albert can do. Albert leaves with the body of Steve and begins this experimentation to push forward the next stage of human evolution. Several years later, he would see to Umbrella's ultimate destruction, but not Spencer's demise. He ultimately won against Umbrella with the aid of his old colleagues, Chris and Jill, unbeknownst to them. And of course, about a year later, he would get his hands dirty dealing with Los Illuminados. Ada tried to stop him from getting a far more stronger strain of the Plaga, but he would ultimately still get the dominant strain by taking the corpse of Krauser. Several years later, he would find his old mentor and comrade ally, Oswald Spencer, and proceed to ram his hand through his chest because the right to be a god belonged to Wesker and no one else. Jill and Chris would fight. Jill would sacrifice herself for her dear friend Chris, but unbeknownst to Chris, they ultimately survived, and several years later in Africa, the final battle between two old comrades would commence. Of course, Wesker ultimately failed. They say pride goes before the fall, and I think that fits Wesker pretty well. He ultimately believed his goals couldn't succeed. I mean, when you're using Ouroboros as your plan, it kind of just writes itself. Wesker was doomed to fail. He couldn't succeed because Chris is that immovable object. Chris saves Jill, and Wesker is ultimately dealt with once and for all. Unless Capcom decides to bring him back. I don't see it happening because Capcom at the end of the day isn't Blizzard. You know, Albert's legacy lasted over a decade, 11 years from the events of 1 to the ending of 5. It's fitting that the game started with a helicopter ride and ultimately Wesker's legacy ends with a helicopter ride, with Chris thinking brighter future is ahead. I believe Wesker was too arrogant, his hubris, I guess, got the better of him. He was too arrogant. I think his goals and his ideas were far too ambitious to succeed, and that's why he ultimately failed. Wesker was a great villain. I would argue one of the greatest villains in gaming history. Definitely in terms of Resident Evil's villains, where, like I said, most of them are hit or miss. And his legacy is a lasting one, because it seems like Chris is ultimately haunted by everything he was dealt with because of Wesker. Wesker's legacy is lasting, his impact great. And I really got to say, Capcom did a good job with him. His legacy still continues on in the form of the remakes. I can't wait to see what this Wesker does. But again, Wesker's legacy is a lasting one, and its impact cannot be understated. But he was too arrogant. His goals and ambitions too insane to even be accomplished. But you know what came after? As much as I love Resident Evil 6, it's just really, really bad.
Organic weapons are a global threat. Start working with the rest of the world. We have to come to my desire to reveal. I'm going to tell them.
I do think it's fitting that Simmons' death creates the umbrella symbol with his blood. It signifies the end of the journey. He's dead, Umbrella is dead, Carla's some great big white goo. I mean, fitting in for this game that I love and just, I really do love Resident Evil 6. But the villains, man, coming off the heels of Wesker's demise is just really disappointing, really lackluster, and I can't help but just absolutely love it, hate it, want more of it. I play through Resident Evil 6 every year, and you may think that's masochism, my friends, but I have a soft spot in my heart for it, which I'm going to do a video about Resident Evil 6 eventually. But no, that's the end of 6. Simmons is gone. They cure the C virus. Carla is ultimately taken out by the genuine real article, and that's kind of the end of it, really. It's finished. 6 is done. The villains suck. The story is a mess. And then it wouldn't be till 7 years later that we truly saw a new kind of horror, back to its roots with these new, interesting villains.
Welcome to the family, son.
Resident Evil 7 returned us back to horror, at least into the mainline entries. The Bakers were a new cast of villains that were truly terrifying and disgusting, like Marguerite, and just near unstoppable, like Jack. Lucas being a sycophant, creating these traps to try to kill you. You know, it's a great group of villains, but ultimately they're villains by circumstance. They were contorted by Eveline to be her happy little family, at least what she saw as her happy little family, turning them into monsters. You know, Eveline and the connections are at the heart of Resident Evil. They're truly the villains. You know, Jack isn't truly evil and wasn't truly an evil man. He was doing something out of the kindness of his own heart, and it cost his family everything. Jack is still probably one of the best sort of boss fights and villains in the series, even though we've only seen him, like, I think we saw him in one game. I can't remember if he was in Village, but you know, he was a cornerstone of 7. Like, he even showed up in End of Zoe. Marguerite is still very disgusting and vile, and I just love it. She was a sick, twisted woman. Once was a good, honest woman turned to do the whims of Eveline, and Eveline is ultimately truly sick and vile. Creating her own perfect little family, and then Ethan shows up and throws that out the window. 7 is honestly a return to true form, and I really enjoyed it. The villains are great. But ultimately, while the Bakers and Eveline are fantastic, we know Eveline still pretty much exists for many years later. The Connections are this new shadowy organization that have sort of taken the place of, I guess, what Umbrella used to be. You know, the Connections deal in the proliferation of bioweapons and bioterrorism. But the thing is, I don't think we know much of what happens to them after the events of 7 and Not a Hero. I just assume that they just are in the background now, but like in terms of like just one game, we never have any payoff afterwards. Chris is able to take out Lucas and stop his transfer of information to the Connections on Eveline. So it's like maybe Eveline was what they were riding on, hoping for, to really make their name in the world of Resident Evil. I don't know, but it's like the connections just ultimately go nowhere. Same with like Mia's story ultimately goes nowhere. We know she's capable. She clearly was a part of the organization, but gets relegated to a damsel in distress in Village and ultimately does nothing. We don't really see what happens to the connections after 7, and I feel like that's a missed opportunity to really expound upon that. Again, I'm not a big fan of Village, but I think 7 has the potential to start this new trilogy where we follow Ethan, but not necessarily dealing with Mother Miranda, which is just a disappointing thing anyways. The connections could have been one of the next big baddies, maybe had ties to Alex Wesker. I don't know, but it's like, the connections just fizzle out. The Bakers were a great villain. Eveline is truly a sick, twisted villain. And the connections just seem to go nowhere. Which, leading into what Village and those villains, maybe it's for the best.
I want to see. He's awake.
Shut the fuck up!
The Four Lords and Mother Miranda, Lady Dimitrescu, Donna Angie, Moreau, Heisenberg, and I'm not a big fan of Village, I'll say it. I don't like how everything ties back to Mother Miranda. It takes away from Spencer as a villain, makes the overarching narrative of Resident Evil feel weaker because it now all ties back to Miranda. She influenced Spencer. I'm not a big fan of it. I think it takes away from Spencer as a villain. I think it takes away from, like I said, the narrative of Resident Evil, makes it feel weaker. I think, honestly, out of all the villains, Donna, Angie, Moreau, Heisenberg, Dimitrescu, they're all really strong, like strong, good villains. Moreau is just sad and pathetic, but he's a good villain regardless. Like, I feel like the villains were the strongest they've ever been since Wesker. I know that says a lot considering I just can't stand Village, but they had really strong villains and I really like it. Had the plot not demanded Heisenberg die, Heisenberg would have been a genuine real threat to our heroes. I would argue he'd been able to take over the world and kill our heroes and take them all out. It would probably take an entire army, maybe even nukes, to wipe out Heisenberg. He just felt that unstoppable, but our undead moldy boy Ethan had to do it to him. So anyways, I started blasting. Ethan was the only one that could have done it, I believe. I don't think Chris could have done it. Jill, Leon, Heisenberg was that guy, and it took someone who was equally as strong to take him out. And Ethan did it. I have my grievances with Village. I don't like how they portrayed Chris. I definitely don't like how they treated Mia. Like, that's such a slap in the face to her as a character. Like, we know she's capable. We know she's competent. Somehow she's ultimately revolved around the damsel in distress. And again, not a big fan of Village's overarching narrative. It's just really disappointing to me as a fan who's played these games for 20 plus years. Village has strong elements like the villains. Ethan's story coming to an end. Shadow Rose completing that story, ending Mother Miranda. But that's the thing, is like, that's in the future, and we only know of one person that's ultimately okay, and that's Chris. So we don't know anything in between where our heroes are, like Leon, Jill. Well, I'm pretty sure Jill is still chugging along because she's got that hot girl virus forever. Since she's gonna stay young forever, and that's a stupid plot point, and I stand by it. We don't know about Rebecca. We don't know anything about these legacy heroes, and but of course this is about the villains, and what we're about to talk about next, like I said, is a golden egg in Capcom's inventory, and they'd be insane not to go through
Went in
with
search
it.
of a bird, but now the bird is gone. The bird has changed.
The bird has been set free from its cage. Alex Wesker and Natalia. It's crazy to think that game is set in the year 2013, right as the events of Resident Evil 6 are coming to an end. That's how long Alex Wesker's been out there. The golden egg in Capcom's inventory, that's what I was talking about. We talked about Wesker's rise and ultimate fall, everything that came after from 6 to 7 to Village, but Alex Wesker is the one thing that we know nothing about. How is it that we've seen nothing from her? The one villain that could surpass Wesker, that could be a genuine threat. I talked in the Village bit that Heisenberg could have been the one to kill off our legacy heroes, could have been the one to overtake the world. But, no, it's Alex Wesker. The last of the surviving Wesker younglings. It's so funny that Spencer, even in his death, his legacy lives on. Not in Albert, the one who had a right to be a god, but Alex, who sought to transfer consciousness into someone without fear. See, that's what makes her more of a threat than Albert ever could be, is because she succeeded where her brother, Albert, failed. She succeeded in doing what she set out to do. About as crazy as trying to create a new world order and separate the wheat from the chaff and only the strong survive. But she succeeded nonetheless, and that makes her more of a threat to our heroes than Albert ever could be. If we're gonna make Alex show up in 9, it has to be with impact. She has to kill a legacy character. All we know is Chris is alive. We know nothing about the other characters. Chris is still trugging on years later, training the next generation of fighters to take on bioterrorism. We know nothing about our other heroes. We know nothing of Jill. Well, Jill's forever young, and I hate that so much. Leon, Rebecca, Claire, and even Sherry, dare I say Jake, Sheva, all these great characters we've come to know and love. We know nothing about where they are in the timeline to which Rose is a teenager. Know nothing of them. Who's to say Alex Wesker made her rise and has just started taking out the people we all know and love? That makes her more of a threat. She is the golden egg in Capcom's inventory. She is the genuine real article, succeeding where her brother Albert could not. You want to make an impact, Capcom? Have her show up in 9 and show up for the next few games. Let her leave a legacy, one of true terror, one of true destruction. If you're going to kill any of the legacy characters, it has to be Barry, because he's so close to Natalia. It would hurt him more than anything to know that he ultimately failed. Killing Barry has impact to the story because he's the oldest of our heroes. He's the one who survived the Spencer Mansion, only to be killed by a she-Wesker. That would be a gut knife to the punch. That would be a punch to the gut. Imagine if Resident Evil 9 starts off with us seeing Alex Wesker alive and well in the body of Natalia, contorting Natalia's body to her who she is, and then starting off with a bang by killing Barry. I don't know, it could have weight to it, impact. There could be a legacy to say that Alex Wesker's could have had more of a legacy than Albert ever could, because she could succeed where he didn't. And that's by causing chaos and pandemonium in the way only she could. But that's kind of it. That's where it leads to. It all has to lead to Alex, and that's just my honest take on it. And we made it to the end of the video. I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear from everybody. Shout out from the rooftops. Does Resident Evil, has it really suffered from a villain problem since Wesker's ultimate defeat? Do you think the villains have been good, or do you think it's a mixed bag? Me personally, I think they really need to use Alex. I feel like that's you're asking for something good to happen by using this character that we've heard nothing from in over a decade. It just makes the most sense. I know I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but of course, let me know what you guys think. If you enjoyed the content, hit that like button. Helps your boy get in the algorithm. If you're feeling super generous, maybe, just maybe, consider subscribing, turn on the notification bell, stay up to date when I post. But that's it. That's the video. I love you all. I'll see you all in the next one. Take it easy.